All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Elisa Jimenez, and I'm one of the social workers here at the Will Rogers Motion Picture Pioneer Foundation. We're welcoming back Summer Forlenza. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and also a former movie theater employee. Before we begin, I just want to encourage everyone to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Our handles WR Pioneers. We're going to be posting updates about intermission content for January. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Summer.
Thank you. So, hi everybody. My name is Summer Forlenza. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have a private practice in California, and I also make a lot of content about mental health online. And I'm really excited for us to talk a little bit more about boundaries today, especially with the holidays coming up. I hear this topic come up a lot with my clients and also in the questions I'm getting from folks online. How do I set boundaries? What are healthy boundaries? Everything like that. So I'm very curious to hear what you want to learn about this and answer your questions. Before we jump into that, I wanted to just give you a small introduction to this topic so that we kind of had shared language and a sense of what we're talking about. So boundaries are expectations and needs that help you to feel safe and comfortable in your relationships. And I think a really important thing to remember about boundaries is that they actually enable us to have healthy relationships. So they help both us and the people that we love to get what we need to stay connected. When we avoid setting boundaries, a lot of times we end up burned out, we're resentful, we're angry, or we end up just avoiding the people who actually we need boundaries with. And that's not a way to have healthy relationships. So I am very excited to talk to you more about this and to hear your questions. I think we have some poll questions to start to get a sense of where people are at with boundaries, what you know about them, and things like that. So I think we'll start by jumping into our poll questions. And the first one here is your experience with boundaries. What do you know about boundaries already? Are you totally new? Have you tried it a little bit, but you're still learning? Or do you feel like an expert? Very curious to hear where you're at. I see we're going to have some questions coming in, which is great. So, what is your experience with boundaries? Let's find out. All right, so we've got people who have tried setting them, they're still learning. That's great. It's awesome that you have a little experience with this, but want to learn more techniques and strategies to really make it effective. So that is a great place to start. Question 2 is about to show up. Where do you feel that you need the most help in setting boundaries? Is it with your family, with your friends, at work, or with a partner? Very curious to see where you feel like you need that support and where it's tricky. Give people a moment to get that in. I was curious to ask this question because I think each of these can be challenging, but in different ways. And also the boundaries we set with these different groups are different. So I'm seeing some people are saying at work and others with their partner. That makes a lot of sense to me. I find that those are the two areas, or those are two areas where people feel a lot of stress around boundaries because the stakes feel very high, high stakes. All right, we've got one more question for you. The hardest thing about setting boundaries is feeling guilty afterwards. You're afraid that you'll upset somebody by setting them. You don't know what you need, or you don't know how to word your boundaries. Let's see. Each of these can be a barrier to people setting boundaries. Some of them, but different people have different experiences with what's the hardest. All right, let's see. So, not setting boundaries because you're afraid that they will upset somebody, or you don't know what you need. Awesome. Very glad to have these 3 questions to start us off and just kind of get a sense of where you are in your journey with boundaries. So at this point, we're going to jump into the Q&A. So if you have questions that you know you want to ask me, please drop them in there and I will get to each of them. And then we're going to start with this question that I'm seeing right here. It says, what's the difference between being assertive and aggressive about my boundaries? I try to stay away from conflict, but I need people to listen to what I have to say. So let's put this up here so that you can see it. What's the difference between being assertive and being aggressive? So aggressive boundaries, if you're setting boundaries and you are aggressive, that means that you're going to be using harsh language. You're going to be very severe or rigid in what you're asking for people. You might be insulting people or putting them down. Being assertive is really different. When we are assertive about our boundaries, we are clear and direct without being like mean. So that might sound like a difference between being aggressive and assertive. Aggressive might be something like, you really need to stop bringing that up at the dinner table. It's totally not okay for you to talk about that here. Whereas assertive can be, I'm not comfortable with us talking about that right now. Let's move on to something else. There's a difference in tone, but the same message is sent across. And I often find that aggressiveness, like aggression, that's the word I'm looking for, makes people very defensive and actually makes it hard for them to hear you, which is why we lean towards that assertive language where you just talk about your experience. I'm not comfortable with that, instead of you need to stop doing that. Great question. Here's another one. I am great friends with my roommates, and let me put this up, but I don't always want to hang out with them as much as they want. How can I tell them I just need some personal time without them thinking I don't like them? This is an awesome question because I know a lot of people struggle with this, not just with their friends or their roommates, but also with partners and with family, right? Where it's like, I need a little bit of downtime. I need to recharge. I don't know how to ask for that without sounding like I don't care about them or I don't like them. So a technique I like to use for something like this is like a positive statement sandwich. So that might be like, I'm going to say something positive first, then set my boundary, and then reiterate something positive afterwards. So using this as an example, you might be like, wow, thank you so much for wanting to hang out with me right now. I am very exhausted and I really need to recharge alone in my room. Maybe we can hang out tomorrow or this weekend. So you say a positive thing, set the boundary, and then say another positive thing. A lot of times that makes it a lot easier for people to hear your boundary and to understand that it's not personal, it's not about them, it's just about you and what you need. So positive, boundary, positive. A lot of times makes it a lot easier for people to hear and to integrate. Great question. All right, here's another one. Ooh, this is a good one. When my extended family gets together, they love to gossip about other relatives' problems, issues, etc. I feel like there's an expectation for me to join in, but I really don't want to. How do I deal with this and spend time with my family without participating in that? Great question. So, one of the things I think is helpful before we even answer this question is just to clarify like why it would be helpful to not gossip about other people who aren't around. Because in some ways, gossip helps us connect to people and it helps us, think about our social situation. But at the same time, if we're talking about people we care about, people who trust us, or people who think we have their best interest in heart, or we have their best interest at heart, it can be really damaging to our relationships if they start to realize, oh, when I'm not around, you're going to be saying negative things about me to other people, right? I can't trust you with information about my life because it ends up being used against me behind my back. So it's really valid for you to not want to participate in this kind of thing and to not want to share, in the habit of gossiping about family members. So how do you spend time with family without falling into that gossip stage? So one option for you is to simply not engage with those parts of the conversation. So this is kind of especially if you have a family where there's some pretty clear, even if they're unspoken rules about hierarchy and who has more power, right? So there's a lot of families and cultures where elders are respected and it's seen as really uncouth to correct them or to disagree with them. And if that's your situation, that what you might do is simply not participate or really engage when that's coming up. There's a technique called the gray rock technique. And basically what we do when we're using the gray rock technique is we become quite boring. So we're not very interesting to talk to about this thing. This is a very helpful thing to do if you have, people who want to engage in gossip or toxic conversation around you, and you don't necessarily feel like it's possible for you to set a clear boundary about that, but you don't want to engage in it. So that might look like they say something like, "Oh, did you hear that your aunt so and so spent this much money on this vacation or something?" And instead of being like, "Oh my God, she did? That is, oh my gosh, and she didn't spend," instead of engaging like that, then you might instead be like, "Oh, yeah, that's interesting." Or like, "Oh, I didn't know that." Right? So you become kind of boring. And then if they try to repeat that, "Isn't that like such a wild amount of money? Can you believe that she did that?" You might be like, "Oh, yeah, I don't know. People do different things with their money." So you are repeating this kind of boring, not engaged statement, and just really asserting that you're not going to participate in that. I share that as an option because, again, there are totally families where it would be seen, it would be really disruptive for you to say, to set a clear boundary about it. But let's talk about that second piece. Let's say you're ready to set a very clear boundary around, "I don't engage in gossip. And I don't talk about other family members like that when they're not around." Then you might say something really, very direct, very clear around, "Oh, I'm actually not comfortable talking about this when Aunt so and so is not here. Um, let's talk about this instead. Let's talk about the upcoming, family get together that's happening." So you would say, "I'm not comfortable talking about that." And then you would offer another topic for you to move on to. And that helps facilitate the shift from that gossip place into a place where you're talking about things that are interesting and constructive. Again, I think it's great that you're thinking about this because it is a big problem in a lot of families. And that generational cycle of gossiping about people when they're not around can make it very hard for people to feel safe and to trust their family members. So breaking that cycle is incredible. Good for you for bringing it up and for talking about it. All right, let me see these other two and see which one we will do first. Let's start here. This question says, "I can't afford to travel home for Christmas with my family this year, but they're guilting me into doing everything I can to make it. They're asking me to max out credit cards, overspend, whatever, and they're not offering to help. FaceTime and Zoom isn't good enough either. How do I tell them that it's just about money and nothing personal?" Beautiful question. It is very, very painful when money gets in the way of us spending time with people we love. It is also exceptionally painful to be in a lot of financial distress because of overspending and credit cards and things like that. So this question is like, how do I tell them that it's just about money and nothing personal? I think another part that's being asked in this question is, how do I deal with them being upset that I'm holding this boundary, even if they might do it differently? That's something I hear in this question, right? Is because it sounds like maybe family knows, hey, this is a money thing, but for them, they feel like you should be willing to put yourself in financial distress in order to spend time with us. And I am upset if you're not willing to do that. But let's start with the first piece. How do I tell them that it's just about money and it's not personal? So I might again use that technique of positive statement, boundary statement, positive statement. And that might be something like, "Hey mom, I was really, really looking forward to seeing you for Christmas, and I'm so bummed that it's not going to work out. I simply don't have the money to come out this year, and I really can't afford it. I'm really sad too. I'm hoping that we can find a way to still feel like we're together on the holiday." So that is a very clear, very direct statement. It doesn't leave a lot of room for the family to argue. If they might say, "Well, what about your credit card? Can't you use your credit card?" You could say, "I'm not comfortable putting that much money in a credit card if I'm not sure how I'm going to pay it back. I know it's really disappointing." And that's the other piece that comes up for me around this is when you set a boundary and family or friends or a partner is upset or disappointed, it's okay for you to validate that it's upsetting or disappointing that this is happening, right? So you can say, "I know it's really disappointing that I'm not going to be able to make it to Christmas this year. I'm really disappointed too." And you can validate the feelings that they have. If they continue to push and there's not a lot of space for you to hold that boundary, then I might think about being, even more saying something around like, "I understand that this is disappointing for you. It's not up for negotiation. I've made my final decision." And I think that phrase, I have made my final decision, people can feel hurt when you say things like that, but it's also very clear. Something that's coming up as I'm talking about this that I think is really important to address when we're talking about setting boundaries is how do you deal with it when somebody is upset because you've set this boundary? This is a great example. How do you deal with it when your family is upset that you're not actually going to be coming to Christmas this year? And I think the first thing is to not take that, like their emotional reaction, as a sign that you have done something wrong. It's actually really normal for the people we love and the people we're close to at times be disappointed by the things that we say. That's really normal. And so, what I want you to think about is I can tolerate people being upset by me asking for what I need. I also want you to think about if people are getting angry and pushing in response to the boundaries that I'm setting, is that might be a sign that that boundary was really needed. So I want to encourage you not to allow that fear of their reaction to prevent you from asking for what you need, because what you need is consistent. It's going to stay there. All right, great question. Maybe we can talk more about that in a moment. All right, let's see. Um, Okay, I read that boundaries protect me. I think before I would try to get my bully boss to stop his behavior, but once I read this, I realized I couldn't change his behavior, but I could change how I responded. Can you talk more about that? Ah, beautifully put. I love this. So yes, boundaries can be protective, and I see another question about that, so we'll talk about that in just a moment. But let's talk about this piece of realizing that you can't change what other people do, but you can change how you respond. And this is really a key part of how we phrase boundaries and what boundaries we decide to set. Something that's not a boundary is saying something like, you need to stop talking to me like that. That's actually not a boundary. A boundary is if you continue to raise your voice to me, I'm going to leave the room, or I'm going to leave the home, right? I'm not going to stay here for that. A boundary is about how you are going to respond if they continue to cross a line for you. So if they don't respect your alone time, if they don't speak to you respectfully when you're disagreeing, if they're bullying you, how will you respond? It is one of the things I say to clients in therapy all the time is we kind of look at a situation and we ask the question, what can you control and what can you not control? And one of the things that we simply don't have the ability to control is how other people act and what they do and how they speak to us and how they move through the world. We actually can't change other people. That, however, when we can change ourselves, we can change how we react to them, we can change how we speak to them, how clear we are with them. And often that will create an environment where we are being treated differently, or we create an environment where we are removed from that kind of abusive or unhealthy behavior. So another thing that's coming up for me around this is like, please be okay and like understand that you setting a boundary doesn't necessarily mean someone is going to respect it. However, once you've clearly communicated about what you need and how you're going to respond if they don't respect that, it's your job to follow up with the kind of natural consequence. So if somebody is bullying you and you say, if you continue to treat me this way, I'm going to start looking for a new job. I can't stay here if you're going to talk to me like that. And then they continue to treat you that way, it becomes your responsibility to take steps that you said you were going to take to shift that. Great question. All right. This next one here, therapy TikTok, a topic close to my heart. A therapist I saw on TikTok said boundaries protect me and they create safety. How is safety related to boundaries? Excellent question. Lots of good questions today. So, one of the functions of boundaries is to help foster and create relationships where you are actually safe, right? And that's actually your job. It is your job to decide who is a safe person in your life and who has access to you and who doesn't. So when you're setting boundaries around safety, I would think about the way that boundaries relate to safety is is this person someone who I can be calm around? Is this somebody who I can be vulnerable with? Sometimes when we're working to keep ourselves safe in our relationships using boundaries, we're doing that by saying, by kind of deciding, oh, this is the kind of thing I'm going to give this person access to, or this is not. So, an example might be a boundary you could set with somebody, and this wouldn't even need to be something that you communicated really directly, but it could be something that you decide is, I'm not going to be alone with this person. This is not a person who I'm going to be spend any one-on-one time with. That is an okay boundary for you to kind of set and to know will work for you with somebody. Additionally, you might say, oh, this is a person that I'm not going to spend any time around, even if there are other people there. So if you have somebody who's been abusive to you or who's been harmful to you, it is absolutely okay for you to make the decision that you won't be spending time with that person at all. Once you start to observe people in your family, at work, your friends, and see how they treat you, that's going to give you information about what boundaries are going to be helpful to create a safe relationship with them. So maybe it's about verbal, their tone of voice. If you get very upset when somebody raises their voice at you, it's okay to set a boundary of, I'm not comfortable with you speaking in that tone of voice to me. If you continue to raise your voice, I'm going to have to take a break from this conversation. And once you set that boundary, maybe you're going to need to remind people about that boundary, but that's totally okay. If they start to get upset or animated and their voice goes up, be like, this is a reminder of my need for you to, this is a reminder that I need you to lower your voice, or this is a reminder that I'm not comfortable with that tone of voice. You can remind them about it. That's okay. Please remember that it is your job to keep yourself safe and that boundaries are very, very helpful in facilitating that. Great questions today. I have a sip of water before we get to this next one. So this says, I'm still learning to set boundaries to protect my time and energy with my friends, but lately I've been feeling very exhausted and on edge. Can protecting boundaries create physical stress? That is an excellent question, and it makes me kind of curious about what's happening for you and the background to this. But let's talk about physical stress and like protecting time and energy and exhaustion. So, one of the things that I think about for boundaries is that they should help you to feel more calm and more safe in your relationships. And what comes up for me around this question is, what boundaries are you setting? And are they genuinely helpful in you getting what you need from these relationships? Right? I'm wondering, is this about I need more time with my friends? I need less time with my friends? I would be curious about that. It also makes me think a little bit about the boundaries that we can set with ourselves as individuals. So I might really want to go out with my friend after work and have a drink and go out or whatever, but I know I have work in the morning, and if I say yes to this, I'm going to regret it. I'm going to feel exhausted. So even though, she's cool with me saying no, I'm the one who wants to say yes, and I have to set a boundary with myself. I don't go out on Sunday nights, or I don't go out on Monday nights, whatever it might be. To answer that question, can protecting boundaries create physical stress? I do want to normalize that it's okay and understandable if when you start communicating your boundaries with other people, it feels stressful and it's almost like you're more stressed at the beginning, especially if you've gone a really long time not ever asking things of people or not having expectations of people in your relationships. Once you start to change that, it can be almost like disorienting for the people in your life, and it can be very stressful for you as you make this shift. That is not a sign that you're doing something wrong or that you shouldn't set a boundary. It's a sign that you're doing something hard and you're doing something new. So I would think about, this is stressful because it's new to me, but I'm still glad that I'm setting this boundary. This is where I want to encourage you to be thoughtful about setting intentional boundaries. So, not saying things because you were told you should, right? And again, I'm thinking about TikTok here, right? Like, there's a lot of talk about boundaries, a lot of mental health conversations on there, and there's lots of great stuff. But one of the things that I can see sometimes that concerns me is people suggesting that you set really rigid boundaries very quickly with family or with friends. If you are more stressed over, maybe like a month or 6 weeks after you started setting boundaries, you're feeling more stressed, that's a good opportunity to be curious about what you're asking for, if it's actually what you need, where you got the idea that that's what you need, and if you want to adjust your boundary. That's the other thing I'm just thinking about this right now is that, like, it is totally normal, okay, and actually helpful to revisit and adjust your boundaries over time. That is so acceptable and actually a really important part of boundaries. A boundary is not something you set one time and then it's there forever. It's a conversation that happens over time in your relationships as you figure out what works for each of you. So yes, protecting boundaries can create physical stress. It can be stressful. That's somewhat normal at the beginning if you haven't been used to setting them and people are upset. That's kind of normal. Doesn't mean you shouldn't set them. But if it's consistently creating more stress in your life to have those boundaries, then I would be curious about if they're working for you or if you want to shift them. Good question. Okay, let me answer this one right here. I'll put a live. I don't know if I understand this right, but I've been thinking about how I sometimes say yes, but then I regret it. I have a teenage daughter, and I know how important it is for me to be consistent with her. But when it comes to myself, I don't always hold my boundary. With others, like my daughter, she needs this, so she trusts me and knows what to expect. I'm wondering about how my lack of boundaries in some areas may impact if I trust myself. Does that make sense? Let me read this again. I have a teenage daughter. It's important to be consistent with her, but I don't always hold my boundary with others. She trusts me and knows what to expect. Okay, yes. So what I'm seeing here is that if you don't have boundaries in certain areas, or if your boundaries are really porous, which means that you're sometimes okay with people crossing them and you're sometimes not, it's a little unpredictable for people, that can impact how much they trust you, the person, maybe your daughter, and how much you trust myself. That makes perfect sense because while boundaries are something that we want to revisit over time, that doesn't mean that we're going to ignore them at some points and then follow through on them at other points. Consistency is really key here. And if you're not sure about it, I think it's okay to communicate that and say, I'm still learning how to do this, or I'm still figuring out what works best for me. For now, this is what I need from you. Or for now, unfortunately, I can't take you to the movies on Friday, or whatever it is that your daughter wants. That's where I would think about setting boundaries with yourself when you say yes, but then you regret it. Is there a pattern there? Is there a time of the week or a time of the day where you're like, oh, if I say yes to something in this, it's going to show up, the time is going to arrive, and I'm going to wish that I hadn't said yes. For me, this is Sunday nights. I can't say yes to things on Sunday nights, even if I want to, because I will regret it and I will wish that I wasn't there. So that's just learning over time. You are totally allowed to learn what works for you and what doesn't over time. So please give yourself permission to change your boundaries. But yes, when we discover and continue to set boundaries that work for us, it can help us trust ourselves and it can help us trust each other, in our relationships. All right, I think we have time for this last one right here. This question says, can I go back or change my mind on boundaries I had already set with loved ones? Yes, 100%. You totally can. Boundaries aren't fixed and they shouldn't be rigid. Your boundaries are, I like what I said a little earlier. Like, they're an ongoing conversation with yourself and with the people you love that develop over time. So if at one point you had told, let me think of an example, a friend, hey, I would love to hang out with you, but I don't go out on Sunday nights. Please let me know if you want to go out later this week. And then a few weeks later, she has an event coming up and you're like, actually, you know what? I do have energy. I've changed my mind. You can let her know, hey, I know I said a couple weeks ago that I didn't go out Sunday nights, but I actually have changed my mind on that. I think it's going to be good for me to go to this. So I would love to go with you if you're still cool with that. So please, please, please don't consider your boundaries like a fixed thing that always has to be one way. They're ongoing, they totally change over time, they change based on our circumstances and our relationships. So, yes, please go back and change them if that's what you need and if that's going to make your life better. Alrighty, my friends. I believe that is just about our time today. I want to take a second before we close up to recommend a book to you, actually, if you have a chance. There's this book, it's mirrored, but it's called Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself. And the cool thing about this book is that it has sections about different kinds of boundaries, how to identify them, the types of boundaries. It's very easy to read, and it's got lots of action steps in it. So I highly recommend you check this out if you're looking for more information on setting boundaries. And I think that that's that. It has been really fun to be here with you. Here we are. Thanks,
Hi,
Chris.
Summer. Thank you. Thank you for that. So thank everybody for joining us today. And just a reminder that there's a quick survey at the end. If you could just fill it out for us, kind of help us out. It helps us to continue to create intermission content for you with you in mind. And I think that's all for today.
Thank you so much for spending time with me. It was so wonderful to talk about this with you guys.
Thank you, Summer.
Right.